to another video from Creativo Solutions. You're currently watching the support videos for the British International Distance College accounting module. I'm taking you through assignment number 4 and I'm showing you how I would approach the different questions. Please visit the website to find more content and resources to help you. Consider following us on Instagram and Twitter and keep watching the YouTube channel for more support. Let's continue with the next question. We've covered 3 questions. We're going to be looking at question number 4 from assignment number 4. Let's begin. Question 4 gives you a note about the trial balance. They say the trial balance failed to agree because the debit side totaled 144 and the credit side totaled 14800. So let's write down those two amounts. So obviously in the trial balance we have debits and credits. The debits was 144 and the credits was 140,800. That's what we've got. So we can see that there's a missing debit and credit here in terms of the trial balance not balancing. So if it doesn't balance, we need to look at the errors. Then they say the difference was entered into a suspense account. Later the following errors were discovered. So we've got 5 errors. Number A requires journal entry. So let's analyze these transactions and let's see what's actually happening in each of them. So the first error says 1 page of the sales journal had not been entered in the revenue account in the general ledger. The total of the page was 1,400. So they've left out a page from the sales journal. The sales journal is obviously going to increase sales and debtors, and they've left it out. So we need to debit the debtors and we need to credit the sales, and this was a total not included. Total for the sales journal not included. That's something that we need to adjust for. So 1,400 is going to be affecting the general ledger. Then number 2 says 1 page of the purchases journal had been overcast by 400. So that was overcast, meaning it's too high. We need to reduce it. That was the purchases journal. So the purchases journal would have debited purchases and credited the creditors. So now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to debit the creditors and I'm going to credit the purchases to reduce it because it was overcast. They said it was too much, overcast, 400 for both. So that would have undone what I did do, which was captured too much in the purchases journal. Number 3. The total of discounts allowed for March 600 had been entered in the discounts account. So we had discount allowed had not been entered, so we didn't enter it. The total of discounts allowed for March 600 had not been entered in the discounts account. So if it wasn't entered into the discounts accounts, we are going to have to enter it into. So that'll be discount allowed. Okay. Discount allowed is an expense, so we would debit that account and we would credit the discount allowed would affect the debtors. And the discount that we didn't record was 600. And that's mistake number 3. Mistake number 4 says cash received from a debtor, 800, had been entered in the cash book but not been entered in the customer's account in the sales ledger. So we entered into the cash book but had not been entered in the customer's account in the sales ledger. So in the sales ledger, there would have been a separate account for that particular customer. The cash received from a debtor, 800, had been entered in the cash book. So that means our cash books are correct. Our cash books would have been transferred to the general ledger, so we can assume the general ledger is also correct. So this just would have been a correction for the individual debtor in his or her account in the debtor's ledger, or in this case they called it the sales ledger. So we wouldn't have to correct the actual trial balance because this would have been specific to the ledger. As long as the cash books were correct, which they said we did record, so they would have been fine. Alright, then number 5 says a payment of 1,200 to a supplier had been entered twice in that supplier's account in the purchaser's ledger. So purchases was affected twice, so we need to fix the purchases. I would have a payment, so the payment would have decreased. I need to credit the purchases, so I would debit the suspense and I would credit the purchases, because they say only the purchase account had been entered twice. So a payment of 1,200 to a supplier had been entered twice in that supplier's account in the purchaser's ledger. So the purchases will have to come down by 1,200. And those are all the errors. We've got 5. We've interpreted. They say narrations are not required, so I didn't put any narrations. You could if you wanted to, just to describe the transaction. Then we had to look at 4b, and 4b says prepare the suspense account to show how it will appear after all the errors have been corrected. So we need to draw up a suspense account. So debit and credit side. This would have been for the suspense account. This is 4b. So we've analyzed the transactions, and now we've got transactions that we need to provide for in terms of the suspense. So looking at the difference here, what is the difference? Let's check. The difference here is this minus that gives you 3,200. So we've identified the difference. The difference here between the debits and the credits. The question gave us 144,000 and they gave us 140,800. So then if I take the difference of those two amounts is 3,200. So there's a missing credit here because the debits are 144. So in terms of the suspense, we've got 3,200 here, which would be the balance in the suspense accounts. And we need to allocate those errors to the suspense. So if I'm looking at the questions again, number 1 said one page of the sales journal had not been entered in the revenue account in the general ledger. So it wasn't entered into revenue. So we had an amount where the sales journal wasn't entered into the revenue account. Revenue would have been a credit. We said we'll credit the sales. So if we're crediting the sales, we're going to then correct this in terms of the suspense account. So the suspense is looking at the missing amount that we needed to allocate, which is 1,400, which would have been the revenue, the sales. Revenue slash sales that needed to be allocated. Then the next point said one page of the purchaser's journal had been overcast by 400. So if the one page was overcast by 400, overcast meaning the purchases would have been too high. If the purchases were too high, the purchases need to come down. It was overcast. So there would have been suspense here of 400 for each of those line items. So 400 and 400 coming from the suspense. So overcast meaning there's a difference. So the difference here being 400 from the purchases, and this was in the journal, so affecting the creditors. So we're going to have to debit the creditors and credit the suspense, and credit the purchases and debit the suspense. Okay, then we've got a note here that said the total of the discounts allowed. So the discounts allowed total was 600. Had not been entered in the discounts account. So the discounts was omitted. If the discounts were omitted, the discounts need to be recorded. The discounts would have to then be a debit, which accounts for the missing suspense. So then we would have a suspense here that's missing. So when we've got a missing debit, it needs to be allocated, because the total of the discounts allowed for March, the total for the discounts allowed for March, so the discounts were allowed, that is an expense. So if the expense had not been entered in the discounts column or account, that means you didn't capture the debit. So that means the credit would have to be assigned to that missing amount, which is the discount. Okay, that's the discount that's missing. So 600 would have been for the discount allowed that we need to provide for. We're creating that account. Okay, let's continue. Let's look at the next bit. Number 4 says cash received from a debtor 800 had been entered in the cash book but not been entered into the customer's account in the sales ledger. Well, that we said it's received from a debtor and it was entered in the cash book. That means we would have captured everything correctly. The only thing is it had not been entered in the customer's account in the sales ledger. That would have been the sales ledger. That would have been something that would have applied in the debtor's ledger, which is unique for that individual. So it wouldn't have affected the actual trial balance because it would have been a separate debtor's ledger. So that's also fine. And then the last one was 5. A payment of 1,200 to a supplier had been entered twice in that supplier's account in the purchaser's ledger. So if it was entered twice in the purchaser's ledger, that means you processed it twice and we need to remove it once, so we were debiting the suspense. Okay, fine. So that was 1,200. That would have been for the purchasers. That would have been too much. So then if I'm looking at the suspense account, the suspense account needs to be totaled. Sum up the left and the right. Okay, no more suspense. Alright, fine. So that would have been the suspense account for this particular exercise. It is quite tricky. You need to think about the actual account and are we missing a debit or are we missing a credit, and then provide for those missing amounts in order to correct the actual trial balance. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel, and if you like the video, hit the thumbs up button and we'll keep creating more to help you.